The legion is asleep. 5,500 men behind a fortified wall, confident in their numbers, their discipline, their steel. But 3 miles ahead of that wall, in the dark, in the trees, in the cold, one man is already there. He has been there for 6 hours. He has not moved. He has not eaten. He has watched the enemy's patrol patterns, counted their sentries, timed their rotations, memorized the ground between here and their camp. Tomorrow, the legion will fight, and whether they win or lose will depend heavily on what this one man brings back before dawn. His name is not in the history books. His rank is not celebrated. His unit barely gets mentioned in the sources. But without him, the legion is blind. And a blind army doesn't win battles, it walks into them. This is the Explorator, Rome's forward scout, its eyes beyond the wall. The Exploratores were Rome's dedicated military reconnaissance unit, not spies, not irregulars, not cavalry skirmishers. A specifically organized, specifically trained corps of scouts whose function was to gather tactical and operational intelligence ahead of the main force. The name comes from the Latin explorare, to investigate, to examine, to find out. That's the job description in one word. They operated in the space between the Roman army and the unknown contested territory where the maps ran out, where the enemy could be anywhere, and where the cost of being wrong was measured in thousands of lives. Each legion had its own attached Exploratores detachment, typically 50 to 200 men, depending on the campaign. They were cavalry. This is critical. A foot scout covers perhaps 20 to 30 miles in a day under good conditions. A mounted scout covers 60 to 80. In military intelligence, time is not just money. Time is whether the legion gets to choose the battlefield or has the battlefield chosen for it. The Exploratores also had a sister unit, the speculatores, who operated as close intelligence gatherers and messengers, sometimes blurring the line between reconnaissance and what we would today call special operations. For this episode, we focus on the Exploratores proper, the mounted scouts who rode ahead of Rome's armies and brought back the information that decided battles before they started. The Exploratores drew from a specific pool. Native cavalry auxiliaries soldiers recruited from provinces and allied territories formed the majority of Explorator units. This was not accidental, it was strategic. A Numidian scout from North Africa knew how to read desert terrain in ways no Roman from Latium ever could. A Batavian from the Rhine Delta knew the northern marshlands as intimately as his own backyard because they were. A Dalmatian horseman understood mountain passes that would disorient a standard Roman cavalry unit completely. Rome was exceptionally good at this, identifying what local knowledge looked like, recruiting the people who had it, and putting it to systematic military use. The Exploratores were also self-selecting in a particular way. The work required a specific psychological profile that not every brave soldier possessed. Comfort operating alone or in very small groups, far from the formation, with no immediate backup and no clear rescue if things went wrong. Sustained patience, hours of observation, without movement, without sound, which is its own demanding discipline, entirely separate from combat courage. The capacity to absorb complex information quickly, retain it accurately under stress, and communicate it clearly to officers making life and death decisions from it, and knowing when to run. That last point is not as simple as it sounds. The Explorator's value was in the information he carried, not in any fight he might win. A scout who engaged the enemy instead of disengaging and reporting had made the wrong decision regardless of the outcome of that skirmish. The institutional pressure was constant. Come back alive. with information, not to fight, to come back. The Explorators' equipment was a deliberate inversion of everything the legionary stood for. The legionary was built to be seen crimson tunic, polished metal, transverse crests marking officers. He was a display of Roman power as much as a fighting unit. The Explorator was built to disappear. Horse. The Explorator's most important piece of equipment was not worn by him. It was the horse beneath him. Exploratores favored lighter, faster breeds. Numidian horses from North Africa were renowned for exceptional endurance, agility in rough terrain, and relative silence of movement. These were not the heavy war horses of the cataphract cavalry. They were lean, quick animals, built for distance and broken terrain, where a heavier horse would struggle or refuse entirely. Armor, minimal. Deliberately, heavy armor slows movement, creates noise, and exhausts both horse and rider on long patrols. The Explorator typically wore a mail shirt lighter than the legionary's plate, or a padded leather garment that provided basic protection without the weight and sound of metal. No transverse crest, no greaves, no decorated shield. Everything that identified a Roman soldier as Roman was, where possible, stripped away. Colors. Some sources suggest Exploratores deliberately wore muted, earth-toned clothing when operating in forward positions. In enemy territory, being immediately identifiable as Roman was not an advantage. Weapons. A short sword, typically the longer cavalry, spatha, and javelins for mounted use. No pilum. The pilum is a close formation assault weapon. The Explorator had no business in close formation assault. Some Numidian and Eastern provincial scouts carried a short composite bow-mounted archery. It was a native skill for many of the auxiliaries who filled Explorator roles. Reconnaissance sounds straightforward. It was not. The Explorator's operational scope covered several distinct and demanding tasks. Route reconnaissance. Before a legion moved through unfamiliar territory, the Exploratores went ahead to assess roads, river crossings, passes, and potential ambush points. The Teutoburg disaster of 9 AD, where 3 Roman legions were annihilated in a Germanic forest ambush, is the textbook case of what happened when this function failed. Arminius had served in the Roman army. He knew exactly how Roman reconnaissance worked. He planned the ambush around its gaps, feeding false information through channels the Romans trusted. The scouts went out and found what they were meant to find. The Exploratores failed at Teutoburg not through simple incompetence, but because the deception they faced was designed specifically to defeat them. It was not the last time Rome learned this lesson. Enemy assessment, counting, observing, timing. How many men? What formations? What direction of movement? Where do they water their horses? Where do they sleep? The Explorator spent hours, sometimes days, in fixed observation positions, building a picture the general could act on. The difference between a commander who knew the enemy's strength and one who was guessing was, in many engagements, the difference between victory and catastrophe. Flank and rear security. During the march and during battle, Exploratores screened the legion's flanks and rear, watching for enemy units attempting to outflank or encircle the main formation. This was the most tactically active role, involving small skirmishes, rapid movement to block enemy cavalry, and real-time communication back to the command element. Pursuit. After a Roman victory, Exploratores led the pursuit following broken enemy formations, preventing reorganization, driving the retreat deep enough to prevent recovery within the same campaign season. An enemy pursued aggressively after a battlefield defeat rarely had the organizational capacity to regroup quickly. 101 AD. Rome is preparing to invade Dacia, modern Romania, under Emperor Trajan. Dacia was not an ordinary enemy. Its king, Decebalus, had already humiliated Rome once, forcing a negotiated peace on unfavorable terms a generation earlier. The Dacian campaigns are exceptionally well documented, primarily through Trajan's column in Rome, which depicts the campaign in continuous carved relief from base to top. The Exploratores appear on that column, repeatedly mounted scouts riding ahead of the main column, crossing rivers to assess the far bank, reporting back to officers. One sequence shows Trajan himself receiving a report from returning scouts, then issuing revised movement orders. The intelligence cycle gather, report, decide carved permanently in stone. What the campaign record shows is that Trajan's advance was unusually methodical. He did not rush. He moved when he knew. And he knew because his scouts told him. Decebalus was repeatedly surprised by the direction and timing of Roman movements, specifically because Trajan's explorators were denying him the same information while feeding the Roman command accurate, actionable intelligence. The Dacian Wars ended with Dacia becoming a Roman province. The gold and silver mines that funded Trajan's building program in Rome, including the column that shows the scouts, flowed back to the capital. The scouts made it possible. The column remembered the general. The Exploratores existed in a specific tension with the legion they served. The legion was rigid structure, formation, hierarchy, the collective over the individual. The Explorator operated in almost direct opposition to this. He made individual decisions. He used personal judgment. He operated beyond the reach of the command chain for extended periods. Roman military culture had to make specific accommodations for this. Exploratores were exempt from many standard legionary duties, daily camp construction, routine fatigue work, because their operational tempo was fundamentally different. They came and went on timelines the legion couldn't control. They returned exhausted, sometimes wounded, sometimes empty-handed. Sometimes they didn't return. In stable frontier zones, the Rhine, the Danube, the eastern frontier exploratores built networks of local informants over years of posting. Local farmers, traders, tribal members with reasons to share what they knew. These networks took years to build and could not be quickly replaced. An explorator who had spent 3 years developing contacts on the Germanic side of the Rhine was carrying something more valuable than his combat skills: institutional knowledge of the human terrain that would take years to reconstruct if he was lost. Strengths, speed and range. A mounted explorator covered ground no other intelligence source could match. Local knowledge through provincial auxiliary recruitment gave Roman armies intelligence quality that Roman-born scouts alone could never have achieved. Operational flexibility, small unit size, and light equipment allowed penetration of terrain the legion itself couldn't enter. Information asymmetry. When functioning well, the Roman general knew considerably more about the enemy than the enemy knew about him. In military terms, this advantage is almost impossible to overstate. Weaknesses. Vulnerability. Operating ahead of the main force in small groups, exploratores were always at risk from enemy counter-reconnaissance and hunter units sent specifically to eliminate them. Deception. As Teutoburg showed, an enemy who understood Roman reconnaissance could feed the scouts false information and weaponize their own function against Rome. Information decay. A scout who observes an enemy force at dawn reports what he saw at dawn. Armies move. Every piece of scout intelligence carried an expiration timestamp. Loss of networks. When exploratores were rotated out, killed, or their informant networks disrupted the resulting intelligence gap, could take years to rebuild. The legion got the glory. The generals got the columns and the triumphs, and their names on arches. The legionaries got their epitaphs and their land grants. The centurions got their stone memorials and their vine staffs carved in relief. The explorator got the dark, 3 miles ahead of the wall, 6 hours without moving, counting the enemy's sentries in a language he may have grown up speaking. He came back before dawn. He gave his report. The general made his plan, and when the battle was won, no one mentioned the man who found the ground first. That was the job, not the recognition, the function. Information that Rome's armies could act on, gathered by men willing to disappear into enemy territory and trust entirely in their own judgment to come back. For 5 centuries, they did exactly that. Next episode, we stay inside the Roman war machine. We're looking at a unit that fought at the very opposite end of the distance spectrum. Not miles ahead, not on horseback in the dark, right at the wall, right at the gate, in the most violent 30 feet of any Roman siege. Subscribe, next one is coming.